Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be transforming this Facebook Marketplace find, and to be honest, when I looked at the ad for this, it looked like a laminate piece, and it's actually not, it's wood veneer. It's got some finish issues, it's got some veneer tears and rips. I'm going to be updating this piece with some paint, but it might not be quite what you're thinking. This is one of those pieces that I had an idea for, and as I got into the project, things changed. Quite a few of the drawers need some repairs, and I'm not sure yet about this hardware. I really love the overall look of this piece, especially those splayed legs. I'm excited to show you what I did with this. Stay tuned! My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. So this piece was actually made in the 50s or 60s by Harmony House, and Harmony House manufactured furniture for Sears. It's not super high-end, but it is fairly well made. You can see there's dovetails in the front and in the back. The bases of the drawers are actual wood, and the inside of the drawer is a mahogany veneer. The drawer faces are actually solid wood, but there's a strip of walnut veneer on top of that. It's very thin. Quite a few of the drawers had some issues with the dovetails, so I'm going to have to repair those. I'm just taking out each drawer one at a time, removing the hardware and giving it a good look over. Now this big middle drawer is the one that has a separation on the bottom here, and you can see that the glue blocks have completely come unglued from the drawer face, which is odd because it's actually nailed at the back. But on closer inspection, I can see that the reason this happened is because the dovetails are out of place, which basically shifted everything. I'm going to have to glue the dovetails back in, as well as the glue blocks. Now that I have all of the drawers out and inspected, I can separate them and get to my repairs. I say all the time, you can never have too many clamps, and it's never been more true than it is today for me. 5 of the drawers need repairing. I'm going to be using a glue syringe for this particular application because I'm unable to move the sides of the drawers because of the glue blocks, so I need something small and narrow to get in the little bit that I'm able to move those dovetails. I'm not overloading these joints, I'm just putting a tiny bit in each one, just enough to hold it, wiping off any of the excess, and then clamping everything up to dry. I already know this middle drawer is going to be a little bit trickier because I have to sort of do a couple of things at the same time. First, I have to put some glue in these dovetail joints here on the side and then somehow manipulate those back together while pushing the bottom of the drawer into the groove that it fits into in the drawer face and try to hold that still while I add glue to the glue blocks and then clamp everything together. So I've got these 2 clamps working on the dovetails, and then these other ones are keeping the back of the drawer to the front while everything is drying. I always make sure to fully rinse out my glue syringes and brush all the excess glue off. This little paintbrush is great for getting down into the nozzle there. And one other thing I like to do is actually clean out the tip of my glue bottle. I'm going to be stripping the top and the top 3 drawers with this circa 1850 stripper. This is my favorite chemical stripper that I've tried so far anyway. And I'm just applying it with a cheap chip brush. You can see it's a little bit stiff here, but as soon as it gets into the stripper, it immediately softens up. And because of this, I can reuse a chip brush many times before I have to throw it out. As I mentioned in the intro, I had no idea that this piece was actually walnut veneer. It looked in the photos, because they weren't great pictures, like plastic laminate coating. So it was quite a nice surprise to pick this up and see that it is actual wood veneer. Because this piece wasn't what I initially expected, my plan for it changed slightly. I was planning to do a wood and paint combination, and I still am, but I'm changing it up a little bit. I made a little splurge not long ago and bought myself a second hose for my Festool, and the reason I did that was so that I could keep both of my sanders hooked up to a hose at any point, because these sleeves that connect the hose to the sander, they're really tight and they're not that easy to put on. So now all I have to do is just disconnect the hose and the plug for each sander, and when I'm done, I can wrap it all up and hang it on the wall, and I'll show you that in a moment. I'm opting to use Mr. DeWalt for this part. I'm using a 180 grit sand pad here on the top, and then once that's done I will go over it with a 220 grit. So at this point in the process, my plan was to leave the top walnut wood grain and paint part of the base, and leave the drawers walnut wood grain. I'm just using some denatured alcohol here to show you what this would look like with just a clear coat. Pretty typical walnut, but as I was doing it, I was thinking, you know, I do so many walnut and black combinations. Let's try something a little bit different with this piece and be a little bit more creative with it. And I'm just showing you here how I do wrap my hoses up. These Velcro hangers were an Amazon gift from a while back. They're mainly used for gathering and hanging extension cords, but the large version actually works perfect for this, and I can just hang these up and pull whatever sander out when I need to. So now my plan has changed to painting the bottom maybe 2/3 of the dresser in a color and having this top section be all wood grain, whether that's whitewash or white waxed. I haven't really decided yet. But first I need to strip the section that will be wood, so I'm just taping this up here and getting to work with my circa 1850 stripper again. This divider here underneath the top drawers will also be wood, and everything below that will be painted. I'm usually pretty methodical when I look at a piece to be refinished or restored or transformed in some manner. Usually I know exactly what I want to do with it and I stick to it, but every now and then you get a piece that sort of has its own voice and you start second guessing everything, and before you know it, you end up with a piece that is nothing like you initially pictured. But usually that's a good thing, not always. But in this case, even though this wasn't exactly what my plan was off the bat, at this point in the process, I'm starting to feel hopeful about it. Now I just need to figure out the hardware. I did decide to reuse the hardware from the top 3 drawers, but I'm changing the hardware from the bottom 4. I'm using these wooden dowels to plug the holes, and then I'll just add a tiny bit of wood filler on top. For the first one, I just glued it in place and then cut it off flush, but for the remaining holes, I actually cut little pieces to stick in, and that went a little bit faster. So because I want the wood grain on the top to show through whatever finish I end up putting on it, I need to repair these little slivers of walnut veneer that's missing. So I have this scrap piece of veneer. All I'm going to do is lay it on top and cut both through the scrap piece and into the original piece, and then just deepen that cut. And that should give me a pretty perfect fit against the old veneer. I'm just going to carefully pry this up and then apply some wood glue once I have the substrate all cleaned up. Once my glue is ready, I'm going to carefully lay my new strip right up against the old veneer. I'm going to try to avoid any cracks, and once I have it where I want it, I'm just going to remove any excess glue and grab some painter's tape to hold this in place while I clamp it down. And I'm using this piece of maple with tape on the underside. This is usually what I use to clamp veneer down, and just apply a few clamps and leave it sit for a few hours. Now here at the back on the other side of the top is another little sliver, and I'm just going to take a little triangular piece off pretty much exactly the same way. I'm going to cut it off, release the veneer, leaving the substrate intact, put some glue on the substrate, and add my patch. I'll also add some tape over it and clamp it down just like I did on the other side. Now for the drawers, because I've decided to paint them, I'm going to just be using some wood filler to fill these areas where the veneer is damaged. Let me just say that it is a rare day indeed where I paint walnut veneer. It's been known to happen on occasion, but it's something I usually take quite a bit of time to think about. This piece is not a fancy mid-century designer piece from Denmark or Sweden. It is mass-produced in the 50s and 60s for a department store. For me, this is a great project to be a little bit more creative. I do a lot of restorations, and sometimes it's nice to sort of break outside of that mold a little bit. Now that my repairs are finally done, I can get on to the fun part, which is getting this piece ready. So I'm using my Surf Prep sander here with a 180 grit sand pad. The reason I opted to switch to this sander for this section is just because it has those flat edges, so it allows me to get right up into these corners a lot easier than it would be with my round orbital sander, obviously. And same thing with sanding the side here. The flat edges of this sander just make this so much easier. Now for all of the areas that I'm going to be painting, I'm using my Surf Prep here to just scuff sand. This next clip you see here, I actually sanded these right after I sanded down the top, and then I switched to my Surf Prep for everything else. The glue on this leg assembly had come loose and the leg was a little bit wobbly, so I just added some fresh wood glue in there and placed the two pieces back together, screwed them in, and left them to dry. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, initially I was going to paint this black. At some point during the process, I decided to move on to one of my custom mix colors because they've been sitting in the cupboard for quite some time. This is the color I opted to go with. It is a mostly green base with a slight bit of gray to it. I'm thinking for the part that is wood, so the upper third of this piece, I'd like to keep it as close to raw looking walnut as possible. So as you know with walnut, anytime you put any sort of clear coat or oil on it, it's going to go to its natural color, which is a deep reddish brown. And I'll remind you here what that looks like. What I mean by the raw natural look is the color that it is while it's raw. So there's different ways to achieve this. You can use a pickling stain, you can do a whitewash. Both of those can be a little finicky on walnut because it tends to have a reddish tint to it. I'm going to be opting for a whitewash, or shall I say beige wash, which you'll see shortly. Here though, I'm applying my custom made color to the lower 2/3 of the piece. And once again, I'm changing my mind. I found after I did this that it was just a little bit too gray. So the base of my custom color is this color, Bayberry, and I did have a tiny bit of Bayberry left in the original jar. I just added that into my mix. Unfortunately, I have no idea how much I added, but I added what was left, gave it a really good shake, and you'll see the difference here in a minute. There wasn't anything wrong with the original color. In fact, I used it on this piece here and it looked absolutely beautiful. But you can see how, depending on the lighting, it can really change the tone, and I wanted it to definitely read more green than gray, so that's why I opted to change the color. So here's where you can really see the difference that little bit of extra Bayberry made. And like I said, there was nothing wrong with the other color, it's just it wasn't exactly what I was picturing in my head, and being an artist and working with color all the time, sometimes it's those subtle changes, you know what I mean? Now, most Fusion Mineral Paint colors look a little bit lighter when they're wet than they do when they dry, so this will look slightly different in about 25 minutes. And now we are on to the issue of the hardware. I found these pulls in my stash and I thought they might be cool on the lower 4 drawers, but the problem is I'd need to spray paint the top handles to match. So I tried these two different color golds. The left one obviously is not a match. The right one's closer, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm going to start first by respraying these metal caps on the bottom of the feet. While that was drying, I went and cleaned up all of the top hardware. Once I had decades of grime and grease gone, I just very lightly sanded it with a very fine grit, and then gave these a spray. I love how this looks, but it's not close enough to that other hardware, so I had to go to plan B. So as much as I wanted to use these, obviously they just weren't going to work. The color, I mean, it's close, but it's not really that close. What I decided to do, I've had these ones that I bought on sale quite some time ago, and I actually spray painted those to match the color of the top hardware. So it's a much better match. I know these are different styles of pulls, bear with me, I think it's gonna look good. Why didn't I use the original hardware? I've used this hardware in the past, and although I do like it, it's just a little bit too dainty for what I was picturing for this piece. So I'm going to put these aside in my mid-century hardware box and save them for another time. I have had so many people ask me for another Rescue Bunny intermission, so here it is. I actually bought these guys this little fun feeder, and I think it's for dogs, but I thought I'd give it a try with the bunnies. So these are the two foster boys. It did not take them long to figure it out, and they were ravenous. I also decided to try it with some of the other bunnies. This is Millie and Flanders. Flanders is the lop who is intent on getting at this. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm just reattaching the legs here, and then I'll flip this right side up and get to work on the wood. I'm doing a bit of a beige wash, and I'm mixing two fusion colors together. I'm using Algonquin and Putty. And adding some water and then shaking it up. You can see it gives me a color that's sort of in between the two, and that's what I want for this. I didn't want this to look white, I wanted it to look more so like raw wood, and I think once this is applied and wiped back, or at least I'm hoping, it'll look fairly close to the color of raw walnut. I'm going to do the same treatment for the other two drawers as well as this ledge, the top, and the top third of each side. I am loving this soft, very natural looking color. With paint washes, you don't often get a completely uniform look because depending on the dilution, you have parts of the natural wood grain showing through, and that's what's happening here, but I love that. I'm using Minwax polyacrylic to seal all of the wood grain. It's water-based and it doesn't really change the color very much, so that's why I'm opting to use it here. And for the painted areas, I'm going to be using something a little bit different. You may be wondering why I'm not using my beloved Odie's oil here. I prefer Odie's on raw wood. You certainly can use it over paint or stain, but in my experience it seems to perform best when it's on natural wood. So for the painted areas, I'm opting to use a product I've used many times in my videos. This is Fusion Mineral Paints Beeswax Finish, and it's technically a beeswax and hemp oil mix. The reason I opted not to use the polyacrylic, I find it just gives too much of a plastic look to the paint, and I prefer a more natural finish. So I'm just applying it with a wax brush and then wiping off any of the excess. This natural cleaner was actually a gift from my Amazon wishlist, but there's a bit of a story to it. This is how it arrived. Picked it up at the post office. It was in one of these bags, and that's what they do when things arrive damaged, and you can see the box was completely soaked in the product. Unfortunately, one of the bottles was completely emptied inside the box. There were 3 bottles altogether. One of the bottles was perfectly fine, which is the one I'm using here, and the other one had a broken top, but I can still salvage it. So once I get through the first bottle, I'll just replace the top. I couldn't entirely make out the note, so if you sent this to me, thank you so much. Because I wasn't the one who purchased this, I wasn't able to contact Amazon about getting a refund, or at least having the other bottle sent out. So if this was you and you want to get in touch with them, just send me a message and I can forward these pictures to you. I was quite excited with this piece to both have a new natural cleaner to try out, and also the fact that the piece is not stinky, like 3/4 of the pieces that I work on are. So the hardware I picked for these lower 4 drawers has a hole measurement of 5 inches and 1/16. So the first thing I need to do is find the center point of the drawer, and then I'm using this ruler because this is basically how far down I want the handle to go. I'm placing it just slightly to the right of 2.5 inches so that I get my middle point, and then using this hole punch to mark where the holes are. Just doing a quick double check that my measurements are good, and then I'm using the center hole punch to fully punch down in, which is what gives my drill a better starting point. Just cleaning up these bits of sawdust and then attaching my handles. And again, the bottom handles are very different from the top, but because the bottom of the dresser is very different now from the top, I think it works. Time to rewind now and have a look back at what I started with. This little dresser wasn't in terrible shape, but obviously it needed attention. And because this was a mass-produced department store dresser, I thought it was the perfect candidate to do something a little bit different. Normally, I don't paint walnut unless I have to, for some reason, but this little Harmony House dresser needed a new life, and I hope I did it justice. Thank you so much as always for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you like content like this, and I will see you next week.